Hi readers, my name is Jess, and today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in June, so let's get into it. The first book that I read this month was The Island of Missing Trees by Elif Shafak, and this book knocked my socks off. It is a marvel of storytelling from start to finish. It's a historical fiction novel that is both equally informative and heartfelt. It has a dual timeline alternating between a fairly modern-day London, where Ada and her father currently reside following the recent death of her mother, as well as Cyprus in the 70s to early 2000s, where we learn more about the family's roots, no pun intended, including how Ada's parents met and fell in love in a segregated, war-torn land. Ada's parents, Kostas and Daphne, have this secret Romeo and Juliet-esque forbidden love going on. At the time, in Cyprus, there was an abundance of violence between the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots, and with Kostas being a Greek Christian and Daphne being a Turkish Muslim, their love would have been seen as a scandal. But as young lovers do, they found a way to be together. They would meet at a local tavern where their secret would be safe. The tavern became this sort of haven for them, surrounded by friends who they trusted, good food, and a beautiful fig tree right there in the middle of the restaurant. Naturally, the fig tree watches their love story unfold, but it also bears witness to unspeakable crimes amidst this conflict in Cyprus, which is what makes the perspective of the fig tree so valuable. That's right, this book has alternating POVs going between third-person narration of the history and the family story, as well as the fig tree's experience through it all. It might sound silly, but the fig tree offers this sort of objective truth in how the conflict in Cyprus affected humans, animals, and the ecosystem as a whole. I mean, the fig tree simply inhabits the land, and it's neither Greek nor Turkish. The writing is elegant and lyrical while also feeling incredibly natural, and it can touch upon some pretty serious, sometimes even dark topics, but I felt like there was this underlying sense of hope throughout the whole book. As Ada learns more about her family's past, she's able to connect and understand in a way that she wasn't able to before, and there are themes of love, loss, identity, war trauma, and immigration. With everything going on in the world right now, this might be a tough read for some people, but I thought it was absolutely breathtaking, unique, and incredibly imaginative. The next book that I picked up was The Bone Houses by Emily Lloyd-Jones, and listen, I didn't think a book about zombies would be for me, but here we are because I thoroughly enjoyed this book. It is a standalone YA fantasy horror about both the dead and the living with elements of Welsh folklore. Our protagonist is a 17-year-old girl named Rin, who is responsible for her two younger siblings after they lost both of their parents, and Rin is also a gravedigger. And unfortunately for her, in her community, the dead may rise in the form of bone houses, which are essentially zombies, compromising the safety of the village. So Rin, wanting to protect her family and her village, and her new friend Ellis, who arrived in town just in time for this bone house takeover, are on a mission to journey deep into the forest and try and stop the dead once and for all. This book truly had everything that I love in a YA fantasy. It had a thrilling, quest-driven plot, a strong and fierce female main character, a slow-burn romantic subplot, and bonus points for an absolutely adorable animal sidekick. Something to note is that I thought some of the storylines were slightly predictable, but even then there were elements that caught me by surprise. Even when I saw certain things coming, I was impressed and thought they were executed very well. This is my first book by this author, and I thought the writing was so naturally atmospheric, and I thought it had just the right amount of spookiness to add thrill while also allowing me to still enjoy the story. I know that I read this in the middle of summer, but I think that this would be such a perfect book to add to your fall TBR if it sounds like something that you might enjoy. The next book that I read was A Girl Called Samson by Amy Harmon. This is an incredible historical fiction book inspired by a real woman named Deborah Samson who served in the Revolutionary War disguised as a man. Basically a real-life American version of Mulan. In this story, Deborah grows up as an indentured servant, and when she moves into work with a family full of boys, she finds herself playing with them, racing, shooting, all sorts of things like that. And even though she's just as good, sometimes even better than the boys at these things, when the war rolls around and they go off to fight, Deborah's expected to stay home and keep the house and even marry. That's just what's expected of women at this time. But she wants freedom and she believes in the cause, so she disguises herself as a man and enlists in the war. But it's certainly not easy because she can't bathe or go to the bathroom like the other men, and if anyone were to find out, well, it wouldn't be good. And then she falls in love with a superior while she's at war, disguised as a man. Yeah. The romance got me. I was wary of it at first because of a certain condition, but boy did they win me over. I know that I mentioned a Mulan comparison, and I think that the love story in this is even better than that between Mulan and Li Shang, because we definitely get to see a little bit more of it and the stakes as well. Deborah is one of my favorite characters that I've read about in a really long time. She is so headstrong and fierce and loyal, and she has such a good heart. Man or woman, she inspires nearly everyone she talks to. And I know that Amy Harmon had to use her imagination to bring those historical references to life, but I think she did such a stunning job. The way that this book approaches the idea of what it means to be a woman is so beautiful. I want to make it clear that Deborah is not rejecting femininity. She's simply challenging the idea of what it means to be a woman, and I find that so empowering. If you like Mulan or history, read this book. It is absolutely worth it. The next book that I read was Renegades by Marissa Meyer, and this is not just a book about superheroes, it is a book about prodigies. In this society, both heroes and villains have special abilities or powers, and the heroes, known as the Renegades, basically rule the world. And ever since they overthrew the villains, they have run basically every aspect of society. But most of the civilians idolize them and just follow them blindly because, well, they're superheroes after all. Nova, on the other hand, sees right through them. When she was a little girl, she made the mistake of putting her faith in the Renegades and they let her down. So now she doesn't trust them and she kind of doesn't agree with the decisions that they're making on behalf of the entire community. But after Nova fails to assassinate one of the Renegade leaders, she must figure out a way to get inside information and take them down that way. And thanks to her anonymous identity and her villain alias, Nightmare, no one knows who she is, so she decides that she's going to go undercover and actually become a renegade. Nova's superhero partner just so happens to be a renegade that desires nothing more than to find out the true identity of Nightmare. Little does he know that the girl that he's spending all of his time with, and maybe even crushing on a little bit, is also the girl that he wants to destroy. One thing that I think Marissa Meyer did well was create this world in which nothing is black and white. The title hero doesn't automatically mean good, and similarly, not all of the villains are evil. They simply have opposing beliefs on the way society should be run, and as the story progresses, you begin to understand both perspectives. And honestly, I think one of my favorite parts of this story is how Nova, who grew up with the villains, begins to challenge her own beliefs as she learns more about her community, and how she doesn't just blindly believe what everyone tells her to. There are many fight scenes full of action, and it kind of feels like you're watching your favorite superhero movie unfold, and you're also kept on edge with all of the secrets and lies. But with that said, this story didn't really hook me until about 60% of the way through. That's when I became really intrigued and curious as to how all of this deception and how all of these secrets were going to catch up to our characters. If you love superhero movies, I think this book could be a good fit for you. Personally, I don't know if I'm going to continue the series, but I did have fun while I was reading it. So then I picked up The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer, and this was a quick feel-good read. We follow a kindergarten teacher aide Lucy who desperately wants to adopt a young boy named Christopher in foster care. Lucy watches over Christopher every day after school, and he trusts her more than anyone in the world, and neither of them can wait until the day that they finally become family. But Lucy isn't exactly fit to be a mom yet. She is really struggling financially, which means that she not only can't afford to legally adopt Christopher, but she's also struggling to secure a house or a car. She's kind of really in need of a miracle. But when the author of Clock Island, which just so happens to be Lucy and Christopher's favorite series, announces that he's written one final book and will be holding a Willy Wonka style competition to determine who gets it, Lucy's miracle seems within reach. If she were able to win the book, she could use the money from the publishers to adopt Christopher and give him the life that he deserves. So now she's off to Clock Island to play the game and solve all the riddles and hopefully win not only the book, but the life that she dreams of. I really liked the characters. They were definitely flawed, but they had good intentions, so rooting for their happiness was so easy. I will say it was definitely pretty clear which direction the book was headed in. Was it predictable? I mean, yeah, but I was also incredibly satisfied, so I'm not complaining. Overall, this story felt like a nice warm hug. It has beautiful messaging about how much the worlds that authors build really mean to their readers, and I'm a sucker for love letters to storytelling. The next book that I read was Graceland by Nancy Crocier, and this is an enjoyable summer road trip read. I read this when I was on vacation, and it was perfect for that. We follow 3 generations of women, grandmother, mother, and daughter, and the grandmother, Olivia, is Elvis obsessed, and she knows that she's nearing the end of her life, so she requests to visit Graceland, the home of the king, one more time. Hope, her daughter, who grew up in Memphis, moved away to Boston, where she has been raising her daughter Dylan all on her own, and she has secrets in Memphis that she can't really share with anyone, but she cannot return to her hometown, like, legally, ever. When Olivia refuses to take no for an answer, she turns to teenage Dylan and convinces her that if they were able to make it to Tennessee, not only would Olivia be able to visit Graceland, but Dylan would be able to meet her father, finally, who she doesn't even know the true identity of. So off they go without Hope, and Hope needs to chase after them and try and catch up to them before they make it to Memphis, and things get even more complicated. As our character's journey progresses, more secrets from the past come to light, and we begin to understand Hope's complicated history in Memphis, the man who fathered Dylan, and the complex relationship between these women. I'll be honest that the extent of my Elvis knowledge comes from the Baz Luhrmann film with Austin Butler, so it's hard for me to say if you were an Elvis superfan if you would love or hate this book. What I can say is that you can expect tons of Elvis references, from the girls' road trip playlist to fun little anecdotes, but I think it is important to note that I was picking up this book for the family drama and the humor and the Graceland setting rather than specifically for Elvis himself. So I think if you're expecting more than just brief references, then you might be disappointed. This isn't exactly the fluffy, lighthearted read you might expect from the cover, but I did really enjoy the unexpected themes of family, love, identity, and forgiveness. If miscommunication is something that you can't stand, then maybe this isn't the book for you, and I don't think that I would go out of my way to recommend it. But like I said, I enjoyed it as a summer vacation read that I could just pick up and read a couple chapters at a time. The last book that I read this month was Kindred by Octavia Butler, and this historical science fiction novel is famous for a reason. It was published in 1979 and takes place in the antebellum South in the early 1800s. It has alternating timelines as our protagonist, Dana, an African-American woman living in California in 1976, is transported through time back to a plantation in Maryland. She was summoned through a young boy's pain, and that young boy is Rufus, the white son of a plantation owner. Dana believes that Rufus is her ancestor, meaning that her existence depends entirely on his survival, so she helps him. Unfortunately for her, Rufus gets into trouble a lot. So every time he's injured, she gets yanked from her comfortable life in the 70s back to the Maryland plantation where she's treated as a slave. But as she continues to experience these time-warping episodes, Dana must adjust to life in the antebellum South. And she has to face the reality of the way that people of color and slaves were treated at this time. I think in general, we are a little bit desensitized to tragic and horrific history. And so while I think Butler's writing can be raw and hard to stomach at certain points, I think it's almost essential in just beginning to understand everything that these people went through. And the idea that while we have progressed, we can never truly be rid of our history really shines through in this story. Now, if you're someone that's going to be bothered by the fact that there's time travel in this story and they never explicitly explain how or the specific rules behind the jump, then maybe this book isn't for you. The characters do just accept it pretty early on. Personally, I appreciated Butler's use of time travel to show the dramatic difference between the lives of African Americans in the 1800s and the 1970s. So I was able to overlook that we didn't really know much about how the time travel was happening. Overall, this book was raw and emotional, and if you're looking for a book that shows the harsh reality of life in the antebellum South, then I would absolutely recommend. It's famous for a reason, but I also would like to extend the warning that if you are sensitive to certain forms of cruelty or violence, I would do your research and be aware that Butler does not sugarcoat things. So, careful reading. So those are all of the books that I read in June. Thank you so much for watching this video, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye!